So what Ezra saw his job as being now was to kind of bring about the new Israel, which would be America, by bringing in not just Kabbalistic texts, but ultimately, he's talking about all the learning at the East is going to come in. So all these things are going to come into America, and they're going to be purified, and then we'll go back out into the world with those things and bring truth and liberty to all these nations that are in darkness. You could almost say America is the new Israel, right? America certainly is the new promised land. Technically, there's nothing wrong with looking at a pattern in Scripture and just sort of saying, hey, we see this playing out again. All of our lives are fractal in that way, right? And so that's not necessarily wrong. But obviously in America, it gets carried to a certain place. Is there some truth to it in the sense that, is there some sense of this, America as kind of like the last place?
Yeah.
Right? When other religions come here, do they become more themselves, or do they lose themselves?
Yeah.
What do you think?
This is Jonathan Pedro. Welcome to the Symbolic World.
All right, hello everyone. And so it is the first Monday of Lent, and Deacon Seraphim and I are wondering, why is it that we decided to have our final discussion about American religion and Kabbalah on this day? But
why would we do this to ourselves?
This is just how it's going to be, and so that's what we're supposed to talk about.
I will say it's not going to be our final discussion of American religion. It's more like going to be our final look at the New York, New England kind of continuum that we've been looking at, which is, because America is just very large and has a lot of layers, spiritually speaking. So obviously, if we were going to, we could do a whole different series where we talk about like the American Southwest and the Spanish Mission and the Our Lady of Guadalupe.
Might want to take a bit of a pause and talk about something.
Yeah, no, we're gonna definitely like this is as much modern, and I'm really trying to stick this out for you guys, but this is about as much modern history as like I can really do. So we're gonna have to take a bit of a pause and go back and talk about King Arthur or something, just to give me like a little palate cleanser, you guys. So this will be the last American one for now, but I do intend later this year. I would specifically like to go. I've been actually having a lot of good conversations with actually a lot of Orthodox people about Our Lady of Guadalupe and the way that icon has been kind of received within the American Orthodox tradition, and which I think is really wonderful and a nice kind of touch point of commonality. And so those are things that I would like to talk about in the future. But for now,
today,
I promised you guys there would be some Kabbalah, and then really have just never delivered on that promise. So I thought that what we'd do today is kind of go through the arguments and some of the story that's laid out in this book, by the way. A lot of the things I'll be referring to today will be from this book, which is called Kabbalah and the Founding of America, the Early Influence of Jewish Thought on the New World. A title and thesis which will not be remotely controversial for any reason in anything that's going on in today's world.
Especially not now.
Especially not now.
Like right now.
Yeah, like, whew. All right, so the basic idea here. So he opens up in at the beginning of the book, the author, whose name is Brian Ogren, he opens up with this kind of a sort of sets a scene. The scene is a letter from Thomas Jefferson to John Adams in 1813. So two founding fathers of our nation. Although you can tell which one we really like better because there's no Adams Memorial in the mall in DC. But in any case, so he writes, and of course Jefferson is a deist. And but he's really interested in kind of Enlightenment philosophy in general and Enlightenment philosophical ideas about God. Adams is as well, but Adams is essentially, he's a Unitarian, right? So neither of them are actually Trinitarian Christians for, by any definition that they, and they would have said this themselves. They would have said, yeah, that's correct. So, so he's writing to John Adams about the moral philosophy of the Hebrews, and he lists off the Mishnah, the Gemara, the Kabbalah, I'm probably going to say this wrong, the Sefer Yetzirah, the Zohar, the Kutzari, and the Talmud. He lists all these off as things that he's reading. Jefferson is reading, at
He's
the
reading
moment.
the Zohar.
Yeah, reading the Zohar. Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
But what he says is he said we really need to read and understand these texts as part of our project of founding the American nation. And his project, the way he puts it, is that he's looking for, and this will not be complimentary, he's looking for diamonds in a dunghill. That's his phrase. So the idea is that there's, and this goes back to this idea that was a really big deal in the 17th and 18th centuries in first on the continent and then in America, but he's looking for this idea of like the pure religion, the true religion. A lot of the later theosophy, that whole world kind of comes from this idea that if you dig far enough back in the mystical systems of the Jews, the Muslims, etc., usually not Christian mysticism, by the way, sometimes, but usually not, that you can find the sort of pure religion. And this idea, which we'll get to more at the end of this conversation, that what Christianity is very good at doing is kind of managing people's moral behavior. But then what we also need is a kind of a stronger mystical underpinning that'll also, satisfy that desire for basically the smart people, the intelligentsia, the people who are kind of at the top of the intellectual class. So his idea here is that if he could go through here and kind of cross-reference the moral, ethical teachings of these various texts with the moral teachings of Jesus, in the same way that he's trying to strip away the teachings of Jesus from what he sees as being like Platonic, Gnostic, rabbinic accretions. Adams is less charitable about this. He says in his response letter to Jefferson, he says that in order to actually properly examine all these Jewish texts, you would need the life of Methuselah. In other words, you have to live a very long time, and it would probably prove to be a wasted life, right? So this is the kind of reductionist approach. But Ogren's thesis is that Jefferson and Adams are actually latecomers to a very long conversation that goes all the way back to the earliest history of Protestantism in North America, under the separatists who came here originally, separatists and the Puritans and so on. And so what he does is he tries to trace that path, and he traces it through the Scottish Christian Quaker theologian George Keith, who was born in 1638, to give you a sense of the area of time that we're looking at. This is mostly 17th, 18th century. And from there, the Puritan minister Cotton Mather and Cotton's father Increase Mather, very famous and incredibly important Puritan authors at the time. And then they had a disciple. It was actually the very first, as far as we know, the very first Jewish convert in America, converted to congregational Christianity under Increase and Cotton Mather, a guy named Judah Monis, who's going to be very important to this story. And then finally, the congregational minister and the seventh president of Yale University, Ezra Stiles, who died in 1795. So that kind of brackets all that off. So Jefferson and Adams are talking about actually something which has been going on in their world for more than 100 years before them. So, the very first chapter of this book begins with a really remarkable discovery, which is that there is in fact a 25-page Kabbalistic manuscript written in English, dates to the late 17th century, so late 1600s, and it belonged to Increase Mather. So you have these, usually when we think about Puritans, we think of Calvinism, and we think of, witch trials, and we think of all these things. And of course, the Mathers are involved in all that stuff. They're involved in all of that stuff. And their particular version of Christianity is what is usually referred to as American Congregationalism. And basically, although there's a lot of different things going on, a lot of different influences going on within American Christianity, as we have talked about already, at the end of the day, almost all American Christianity owes owes various debts to this, to American Protestant Congregationalism. But he has in his library, among a bunch of other Quaker tracts that he'd also collected, he has this manuscript that was written with basically it's a Kabbalistic text, and it was part of an epistle that he'd addressed to a man by the name of Daniel Leeds, who was a Quaker surveyor and who had compiled and published a collection of German mystical writings called the Temple of Wisdom. So you have these people who are, this is the fun thing about early America, and now I guess YouTube, because you have these people who spend all day working as like surveyors or data analysts or whatever, but then like in the evenings, they're like composing texts of mysticism and circulating them among their friends and stuff like this. It's a very fun, interesting time for publication. Lots of little presses being set up, people publishing things like this.
Mhm.
And again, kind of reminds me in certain ways of our current moment. And basically, they're having this argument about they're having this argument about Quakerism. They're having this argument about the resurrection. They're having this argument about like certain Gnostic aspects of Quaker religious identity, all these different things. And you have Increase Mather actually falling back on the Kabbalah, and in particular this idea of Adam Kadmon, which maybe you can explain, because I think you probably know a lot more about this stuff than I do. But basically, he falls back on this idea, and he kind of argues that this is the soul of Christ extended across all of creation, which is a pretty common Christian interpretation of Kabbalah. I should mention that since the Middle Ages, Christians, mostly Roman Catholic theologians, cardinals, bishops, etc., have been reading and interpreting like this. So there's actually an entire Christian, mostly Catholic, but an entire Christian stream of Kabbalistic interpretation that's been going on for a long time before this.
Yeah.
But it is super interesting. Like you don't think of Puritans and Quakers as people who are necessarily reading and circulating Kabbalah. So,
well, do you know how many of these people were Freemasons? I said I would never do it again, but here we are. We are announcing the Symbolic World Summit in May 2026. I have so many great people around me that I'm just excited to do it, even though I thought it would be crazy to do it again.
Our summit's going to be from May 14th through 16th in Broadview Heights, Ohio. You can buy tickets at symbolicworldsummit.com. Keynote speakers this year are Father Josiah Trenham and Dr. Mary Harrington, which is a combination nobody knew that they wanted, but I think is going to be absolutely incredible. And of course, Jonathan and I will be speaking as well as several people from around the Symbolic World community.
A lot of people that you like, that you've seen, are going to be there, are going to come. We're going to have book signings. It'll be a lot of time for people to meet and to greet. We're also doing Supra as well. And so come and join us. We can't wait for this, and we're excited to meet you in person. Well, do you know how many of these people were Freemasons?
I have no idea.
Adam a Freemason? We know Jefferson was, right?
Oh! If you're talking about the founding fathers, yeah, absolutely, yeah. But this is much later. This is much earlier than that.
Earlier, okay.
So much earlier than that.
We don't know how, because there's a connection in general between Kabbalistic interest and Freemasonry, because obviously in Freemasonry you have a kind of gathering of people that at least pretend to be above the religious level, that have a kind of esoteric doctrine of the unity of all men, the unity of all faiths, and all of that. And so there's a place for these kind of transfers to have. There were some pretty prominent Jewish members of the Great Lodge of England, for example. And so there's this like discussion happening up above. And so, like you said, this idea that you have to go to the mystical writings of the Jews and the Muslims is already a kind of Masonic thinking in terms of what it is that's going on. The second thing I would say is that what seems to have happened, at least from an Orthodox perspective, is that sometime in the late Middle Ages, the the kind of integrated mystical aspect of Christianity seems to have diminished, or to have been opposed, or to have disappeared, or to have become kind of marginal. And therefore, there's this, because, like, for example, the idea of Adam Kadmon, the idea that this idea of like the eternal Adam, or that in some ways Adam as in heaven, you could say, and that there's Adam in heaven, and then that is kind of an aspect of Adam that is at the beginning of creation, which fills the world. It's like, well, when you have St. Maximus saying
Right,
that God is at all times and in all things working out his incarnation, it's like, well, it doesn't shock us, doesn't shock me, it doesn't shock us. But for people who have developed this more, can I say this, like this more mechanical way of thinking, this more not materialist yet, but moving towards a kind of rationalism and materialism, these ideas were not as prevalent.
Yeah. So I think that the people I'm talking about right now, like George Keith and Increase Mather, they're a little earlier than the introduction of Masonism to the New World, but not by very much. Certainly, those ideas are already in the air. Certainly, that's it's a big part of what's going on. It's really hard to kind of sort through this period in history when you're looking at these organizations. Obviously, some of them were quite secret, although usually not as secretive as they like to be. They like my impression always with some of these was secret societies, for the literati of the time, is that they were constantly telling people how secret they were. It's just it's a very exclusive club. You probably never heard of it. Let me tell you about how exclusive it is. And
exactly.
How much you haven't heard of it, but. In any case, so George Keith, what he eventually comes to, because he's really struggling. I don't want to get too much into Quaker theology today, just because we've got a time limit for this video. But the thing that he's sort of arguing is this insistence between there's this in Quakerism, this idea of like the internal light, right? That's supposed to guide the believer, right? So and a lot of Quakers were moving away at the time from like a belief in the historical person of Jesus Christ, the historical, resurrection, and so on and so forth. And oddly enough, Keith is actually using he's trying to use Kabbalah to make an argument for both. And so this is how he's using it. He's using it to interpret, identify Christ with this Kabbalistic figure, Adam Kadmon. He's trying to use it to basically make an argument for that we can have both an internal light and an external historical Christ, and they're actually both necessary for salvation. And here's these old Kabbalistic categories we can kind of use to argue this. He is eventually ousted from Quakerism in 1692, and it is because partly from the accusation of preaching two Christs. That's the charge that they use when they oust him from Quakerism
for that reason.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah. So the two images of Adam, he doesn't see them as being the same, and I think that's an interesting for us, at least as Christians. We have this idea that Christ is the new Adam, right, or is the fullest aspect of Adam, and kind of heals the broken Adam from the Old Testament. But we don't need two Christ, the universal Christ, the one that is from the beginning of creation, that fills all creation with his presence, is not different from the one that was born in Bethlehem in the first century.
Yeah. So, the interesting thing is that there's a lot of initially kind of polemics between George Keith and the Mathers. So, for instance, when Cotton Mather is 27 years old, he publishes a tract against this is what people did back in the day. Now we just subtweet people, but back in the day, if you really had a substantive disagreement with somebody, you would publish a tract, which would be very often several hundred pages long. And you would circulate it, but it specifically is like, here's this person's beliefs, and here is my systematic takedown of everything that they believe, right? I think of it as sort of print mogging, if you will, for the Gen A, Gen Z crowd out there today. Hopefully, I used that correctly. So he basically he publishes this huge takedown of Keith, and again, basically kind of gives him this backhanded compliment, says he's got more Hebrew and Greek than ever Pilate had upon the cross, which is to say, yes, you're very learned, but you've kind of betrayed the whole religion here, right? And one of the, but if you looked at this and you thought, okay, well, the Puritans, like the Mathers, are just against Kabbalah, you would be wrong.
Yeah.
You'd be wrong, because in fact, they're super interested in it. They're super interested in it, and they're super interested in it specifically in the light of what's going on in the wider Jewish and European world, specifically in respect to a movement called Sabatianism. Now, you probably know about this, Jonathan.
Yes, I do know about that.
Yes.
Let's just dive right into that mud, Deacon Seraphim. Let's go. I don't
jump right in. Do you want to introduce it?
You need to talk about Sabatianism?
Yeah, man.
I mean, sure. If I don't think I've ever talked about it in public. So Shabtai Tzvi was a candidate for a Messiah.
Right.
And he was a very mystical person. He did all kinds of weird stuff. He married the Torah and was like a very strange figure.
And of course, his name, means the rule of Saturn,
Yeah, or Sabbath.
Yeah, Sabbath.
To be generous.
Yeah. But I mean, a lot of people at the time were like, "Ooh, Saturn," because like there was within a lot of mystical traditions in Europe this idea that the Messiah, the Messianic age, was going to come in the age of Saturn.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Shabtai Tzvi, the thing that happened with him that's wild is that he basically, the Shah, I think it was the Shah, who became very suspicious about this man who was making a lot of noise, and so arrested him, and then Shabtai Tzvi converted to Islam, then that became a sign for several of his believers that they should convert. And so these movements led to the mass conversions in Spain, in Portugal. All of these weird movements where all of a sudden there was these mass conversions were related to things that were going around Shabtai Tzvi. And the question was, in some ways, you could convert and remain secretly Jewish. And then there was this whole antinomial thing in Sabatianism, which was to secretly break the rules to arrive
in Messianic
at
age. Things that had been previously wrong would now become right, and so you could secretly go against it.
Jacob Frank, which is like one of the people that said he was like a reincarnation of Shabtai Tzvi, basically went all out in that. So they would have secret orgies. They would have all these secret things that they would do, which were to break the law. And so it was this whole aesthetic of infiltration and of conversion, but infiltration, which a lot of people use now today, talk about that now today in terms of, the more anti-Semite types will talk about Sabatianism as if it's like the main thing that Judaism is, which is definitely not true. I mean, all the rabbis objected to Sabatianism, like all the kind of official rabbis until today. So
the thing that's really fun about all of this is that at the time, there were Christian writers, and when I say Christian writers, I mean mainly like Protestants, mainly Puritans, but also like Puritans in England. It wasn't just in America; it was on the continent. It was in England and on the continent as well. There were Christian writers who were pointing to certain passages in the Bible, and basically pointing this and saying, "Okay, yes, Edom and Amalek are going to be overthrown." Well, Edom means Rome, so in this case, it means the funny thing is that the Sabbateans thought Edom meant Rome, but they applied that to all Christians. And the Puritans, the Protestants, thought that Edom meant Rome, but they applied that specifically to the Roman Catholic Church, right?
Right, yeah.
And so Edom and Amalek are going to be overthrown. So Amalek, that's obviously Islam, and then Edom, the Edomites, that's the Roman Catholic Church. And so what they were, you can't stress actually how poorly we have understood how connected even the early modern world, forget the ancient world for a minute, the early modern world, which is really the period we're talking about now, how connected it was. There, people were noticing, I mean, Sabatianism is mainly happening in the Middle East, but people are talking about it in London. They're talking about it in the colonies in America. They're talking about it everywhere. People are noticing. And it's not like at this particular time in history, there are just like a lot of Jews in the colonies. Like by some accounts, there may be less than 3,000 at this time. It's not a lot. And but people are noticing it, and they're taking note, and they're talking about it, and they're writing letters about it, and people are in London. Tracts are being published all the time, basically say, "All right, this is it, guys. This is it. This is the end of days. Jesus is coming back, and here's what's going to happen: the Jewish army that rises up is going to destroy Islam, and the Protestant army that rises up is going to destroy Rome, and then the two will meet in the middle, and all the Jews are going to convert, and they'll become Protestant, and then Jesus will return."
So how does this have to do? What does this have to do with Sabatianism?
It was happening at that time as a response to Sabatianism.
Okay.
People like Protestants in Western Europe and in the colonies were aware of the movement. They were following it, closely, as close as they could, with the technology and the communication at the time. And at least at the initial moment, I mean, this is before his conversion to Islam. At least at the initial moment, it looked to them like, okay, this is it, guys.
So before his conversion, this is it. Like the Jewish Messiahs come and they're going to raise an army. And okay. I thought like after, I was like, why? I was like, what? Yeah, when he converts to Islam, things get weird. Like,
things get weird. No, this is just before that. Yeah, this is before that. Yeah. So all of this is kind of going on, and then of course, nothing happens. Like he's converted, either willingly or forcibly, but he's converted, and no great Protestant army ever rises up to destroy, Rome. No great Jewish army ever rises up to destroy Islam. Like none of those things happen, but this stuff is sort of in the air, and people are really thinking about, okay, there's these Messianic movements within Judaism, and this stuff is somehow going to be connected to the return of Christ and to like this sort of the new world, actually.
Okay, yeah.
So this is what's very interesting. There is a sermon by Increase Mather, who in which he says, this is from a series called "The Mystery of Israel's Salvation," that he says that when the Book of Revelation talks about the new world, usually in King James English is translated "new earth," but you could also call it "new world." He says, well, that's us. This is the new world. So America, Increase Mather, identifies the new world of Revelation chapter 21 with as being an eschatological prophecy concerning the American continent. And he says this works because America is unknown to the penmen of the Holy Scriptures. It is outside of space and time. Yeah. And so it's this place where a new space and a new time, basically where the remnants of all these things from the old world can be gathered and find their redemption. So he sees, there's a false messianism with Tzetvi, but that can be cosmologically redirected towards this new, towards the proper truth of Christ and the bringing about of the eschaton, which is fundamentally tied up with America. And so for Increase Mather, this is Ogren's argument and some other scholars' arguments as well, the discovery of America itself and the establishment of America itself is something which kind of heralds like actually a whole new age of hermeneutics, a whole new way not to just read and interpret the scriptures, but to read and interpret everything. So all of this eventually kind of this period of messianic fervor that's going on at this time in the 1660s kind of makes it to America, and you have early American authors writing like Samuel Sewall, who writes about he's writing about hearing about Sabatianism, and again this is before the whole movement kind of collapses, but he's talking about the imminent conversion of the Jews, all these different things. All right, so all of this culminates in this guy named Judah Monis. Judah Monis is an Italian-born Sephardic Jew. He's from a Converso background, who arrives in the Boston area, and in 1722, he, after having kind of come under the influence of the Mather family, he converts to Congregational Protestant Christianity. And they have a huge very public ceremony about it. Like, this is in all the papers. Everybody's talking about it. And in fact, he is baptized at Harvard's College Hall.
Mm-hmm.
Before he became a Christian, Monis had been a disciple of a rabbi named Jacob Sisportus, which I'm, again, probably saying the name wrong, but he was a prominent anti-Sabbatean rabbinic authority he was a Kabbalist, but he was strongly anti-Sabbatean. And, so through him, Monis has inherited that sort of whole, Kabbalistic inheritance.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he converts, he brings with him the significant Kabbalistic texts. He had his own compendium of this, which includes, obviously things like the Zohar, as well as other materials. It looks like his collection of Kabbalistic materials that he'd kind of inherited from his rabbi was really a combination of like Kabbalah and then also a bunch of Christian occult stuff. I mean, again, like people just sort of, this stuff, people are going to be mad about this on either side, I guess, but this stuff really bled over into each other kind of constantly throughout throughout this period. Yeah. So in any case, the funny thing is that his teacher had been anti-Sabbateans precisely to try to defend rabbinical Judaism against these antinomian threats. And then his student ends up converting to Protestant congregational Christianity, right? Whereas the Mathers, they were anti-Sabbatean, but it's because they see that as a distraction from the true eschatology. So what you end up getting is this kind of funny moment where, okay, yeah, the eschaton is never brought about in this other way, but when Monis is baptized, the Mathers basically say, "This is it. This is the beginning. We're going to convert all of the Jews. It begins now. This is it. This is the eschaton. It's happening."
Mm-hmm.
Now, as far as we know, Monis was the only Jew that the Mathers ever converted. This was not a successful undertaking. But what happens is that Monis introduces the Mathers, who are already familiar with Kabbalistic works through some of their polemical writings against various Quaker figures. But Monis introduces them to
these texts.
Mm. And in fact, he writes an extended series of treatises, which are eventually collected into a single treatise called, originally the treatises were called The Truth, the Whole Truth, Nothing But the Truth. And then finally they're compiled into a single treatise called The Truth, the Whole Truth, and Nothing But the Truth. And in the third part of that treatise, it basically gives you an entire Kabbalistic text. It is the first Kabbalistic text wholly produced and published in North America. And basically what it is doing is trying to use passages from the Zohar to argue for the Christian understanding of the Trinity.
Yeah. And there were already examples of that happening in different parts in Europe where there were disputations between Christians and Jews, where Christians would try to use rabbinical text to show that no, it's already there, even in your own text. That like the ideas of the Messiah ben David and Messiah ben Joseph, like these are all kind of pointing to Christ. Yeah.
Well, definitely in the like, especially like the Italian Christian Kabbalistic stream, you have a lot of people writing and talking about that stuff.
Yeah.
So this kind of creates then this you could say a stream or a lineage of transmission there in the kind of the Harvard, Yale, those old, Ivy League schools, like we consider them now. And eventually this kind of ends up boiling down to a guy by the name of Ezra Stiles. Now, Ezra Stiles lives a little bit later than these guys. Stiles is he's 18th century. He's born in 1727, dies in 1795. So he's a little bit later than the Mathers, but he basically receives all of this stuff, like all these Kabbalistic texts that the New England Puritans have kind of been cultivating, as well as all of the arguments that they have been trying to make. And the arguments kind of they kind of go in a circular way, so it's hard to trace them. But it's something like America is the new world. This is the eschaton. We are there is a transmission of dispensations, right, or of covenants. So that the covenant was originally given to Adam, and then it's given to Moses, and then it's given to David, and then it's given to the early church, and then it passes on, and as each of these groups apostatize, that the covenant continues to be transmitted. So the current holders of the covenant are American Protestant Congregationalism, right? So that covenant, the Jews are no longer part of that covenant, but whatever is, but that the conversion of the Jews and bringing them back into the covenant is the last necessary step, and it is the thing that they expect to happen imminently as part of the establishing of the new world as the new earth, as the kingdom of God, right? And so you have these writings. There's famous things like the city set on a hill image and all of these other writings, but there's all of these. I'll just read a little quote from Stiles here, Ezra Stiles. He says, it may have been of the Lord that Christianity is to be found in such great purity in this church, exiled into the wilderness of America. And so basically, within the context of the sermon, he explicitly refers to God's American Israel, and he says that the United States will, by the ordering of heaven, eventually become this people. So it's not quite manifest destiny, which is I think a much kind of coarser version of this, kind of downstream. By the way, my country beat your country in hockey yesterday.
Yes, I've been seeing that all day.
Yep. I really am trying to lay off the French a little bit, but in this case, it's just all of Canada.
It's Canada.
It's not France. It's not French specific. Yeah. This is another line from Stiles. And by the way, Stiles was super into this stuff, and to the extent that he would draft. He'd learned Hebrew, so he would actually draft his sermons in Hebrew, and then he would translate his own sermon from Hebrew into English, because Stiles had this idea that Hebrew is it's the sacred language, and so you write important things in Hebrew and then you translate them later. So he would translate his own work from Hebrew into English. I have no idea if his Hebrew was actually any good, but this is what he did. So this is what he says. He says, this great American Revolution, this recent political phenomenon of a new sovereignty arising among the sovereign powers of the earth, will be attended to and contemplated by all nations. Navigation will carry the American flag around the globe itself and display the 13 stripes and new constellation at Bengal and Canton on the Indus and the Ganges, on the Wangho, on the Yangtze, and with commerce will import the wisdom and literature of the East. That prophecy of Daniel is now literally fulfilling, that there shall be a universal traveling to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. This knowledge will be brought home and treasured up in America, and being here digested and carried to the highest perfection, may reblaze back from America to Europe, Asia, and Africa, and illumine the whole world with truth and liberty. So that's pretty wild stuff.
Yeah.
Pretty wild stuff. But, the connection between this and the other stuff is, again, there was this moment of Messianism that was kind of experienced its failure to launch in the old world. And these New World writers, what they're saying is, oh, no, it's because it's actually supposed to happen here. But the way it's going to happen here is going to be through the creation of a new Torah. That's how Stiles writes about it. So Stiles' first name is Ezra, right? And he basically kind of saw himself as the new Ezra, the second coming of Ezra. I don't think he actually believed he was the actual reincarnation of Ezra, but he very much saw himself as a new Ezra, in the sense that, there's all these traditions within Judaism, and then some of them even, taken up in Christianity, that, when Ezra rewrites when Ezra comes back to rebuild the temple, that the law has actually been completely lost, and so the entire thing has to be rewritten by Ezra and by the by the synagogue, actually under divine inspiration, right? That's kind of the idea. So what Ezra's idea is, Ezra Stiles' idea, is that there's this transmission. He says the Kabbalah is next to the scriptures, the most ancient learning. It was orally communicated from Adam to Moses and from Moses to the 120 of the great synagogue. So he has this idea that there's in addition to the written Torah, there's also this secret transmission, which is the Prisca Theologia, the pure religion that's transmitted from Adam to Abraham to Moses to Ezra in the great synagogue, then through the Kabbalistic teachers to Monis, this Jewish man who converted to Christianity, and then from him to American Congregational Christianity, all the way down to Ezra Stiles. So what Ezra saw his job as being now, was to kind of bring about the new Israel, which would be America, by bringing in not just Kabbalistic texts, but ultimately, he's talking about all the learning at the East is going to come in. So all these things are going to come into America, and they're going to be purified, and then we'll go back out into the world with those things and bring truth and liberty to all these, nations that are in darkness.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you can feel this flavor, this way of thinking. Like you can see how it is definitely a flavor of American religiosity, and whether it's Congregationalism or Baptists or whatever, like this idea that, sometimes implicit that in some ways, we're the land of the missionaries now. Like we're the land that have come to the pure faith, and now we're sending out, people all over the world to basically become Southern Baptists.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I can't actually. I'll make a little confession here, and that is to say, I have no idea what it would have been like to grow up Baptist in Canada, because being Baptist and being American went together. So, I have no idea what your identity would be if you were Baptist in some other country.
It would be very American, is what it would be, in the sense that you could, and I hate to say this because a lot of my growing up, my Baptist, there was a little bit of a Belgian European connection, but most of it was American. Like this connection to the United States was very strong.
By the way, a lot of early Baptists were into this stuff too. Ezra Stiles, he gets one of his main manuscripts of the Zohar from a London Baptist Calvinist pastor who has his own edition that he's been working on meticulously, and sends to him.
Well, it's super interesting because what you're seeing happening is a desire to recover a kind of what we call in the Orthodox tradition a phronema, that is a kind of mode of thinking, something which is at the deepest level of religion that will infuse it, with its deepest meaning. And in the rejection of the Christian one, people are kind of looking around to see where to find it. And I think that you see exactly this in a lot of Messianic Christianity. You see this kind of Messianic flavored Christianity. You see this problem, which is that we have rejected this deep line, like this deep living river. We have the text, and so now we're looking for this deep river, and we're going back to this kind of pre-Christian source in order to find it. I want to tell one little story to connect to this. Someone that I care about very much, but a pastor. Once I went to a Baptist church after I became Orthodox, and they knew that I'd converted to Orthodoxy, which made it all very weird. I think it was like my wife's. It was the church actually that my father was pastor when I was younger, but my wife's parents still go there. Anyway, so the pastor came up to me and was super excited to tell me about this rabbi who came to church to do a Sabbath service in front of everyone, the whole church, and explaining what the wine was and the bread and all this. And he was like, wow, it was so rich. It was so deep. It was like, it really helped me understand, more understand communion and all the things we're doing. and I was like, I can't, I wasn't going to say anything. I would just smile, but I kept thinking, you had it. You had it and you threw it away. And now you're going to this source. But it's weird, like, since we've been talking about this from the beginning, that's the sense that I have, is that
Yeah.
this kind of desire to find a mystical tradition when you've destroyed your own or you've thrown it away.
You'll probably get a kick out of this. The Stiles never got in trouble with other Christians for digging into like Jewish mysticism, but he did get in trouble sometimes for also reading Dionysius. And but at one particular point in time, he made friends over the course of his life. Ezra Stiles made friends with several different rabbis, and some of them were like really close friends. And so they would sit and they'd stay up all night, like comparing like the celestial hierarchies with the Zohar and like all this different stuff. And it's super interesting because he's like he says privately in a letter to someone. Because of course the entire Reformation was very dismissive of the Areopagite corpus. In fact, that's actually the whole sort of to understand how far this goes, right? The same guy who debunked the that's the second vapor lock. The same guy who debunked the donation of Constantine, which is the forged fraudulent document on which, you know, a lot of late medieval ideas of the power of the papacy, not just over the church, but over like also secular authorities, was all based on. Well, the same guy, he debunked that, and it was so successful, he was like, I wonder what else I could debunk. So he starts out and going and debunking other things, books of the Bible, apostles, and so on and so forth. One of the things he debunks is the Dionysian corpus, and he says, there's no way this could have been written by, you know,
first century,
Saint Dionysius the Areopagite. Well, the main church of the kings in France, in Paris, is, please say it in French.
Yeah, Saint Denis.
Saint Denis, which is, you know, named after Saint Dionysius. And in fact, they used to have a Greek liturgy there at that church at one particular point in time, as kind of like a nod to that patronage. But the style that church was built in, because like, debunking Dionysius was debunking the entire medieval project, and therefore the style that church was built in, they decided to pejoratively refer to as Gothic. As a way of saying it's barbaric.
Barbaric, yeah, that's right.
So there's actually like a string from like there's you can connect the dots from, you know, debunking of the Dionysian corpus to the reason we call Gothic architecture, right? You know, it's just so weird to me. It's so funny. But so he basically says, and of course Luther hated Dionysius, just really hated him. He had all kinds of disparaging things to say about him. But but here's Ezra Stiles, like sort of like reading Dionysius, almost like that's the taboo thing, that's the secret thing, and just being like, it sure seems like maybe we kind of had this. Maybe these things like are describing something kind of similar, and so it's super interesting. I think maybe a question that I could ask you to sort of wrap up this video, which we're trying to keep a little tighter for time's sake because we have other things we have to do today, would be to say, obviously, this idea that America is you could almost say America is the new Israel, right? America certainly is the new promised land, right? That's an idea that there's technically there's nothing wrong with looking at a pattern in Scripture and just sort of saying, hey, we see this playing out again. You know, all of our lives are fractal in that way, right? And so that's not necessarily wrong. But obviously in America, it gets carried to a certain place where, you know, the early American project began to think of itself as being, so Thomas Jefferson, one of his proposals for the seal of the Great Seal of the United States is Hengist and Horsa on one side. Those are the, you know, leaders of the Angles, the Saxon, and Jutes who, how do I say this gently, colonized Britain, and then on the other side it would be the children of Israel wandering in the wilderness. So there's this kind of overlap of Anglo-Saxon identity, and of course there was like a whole thing of England as Israel that was also going on at this period in history as well, which should be interesting to talk about because it's probably not as well known. But this idea, this overlap of Anglo-Saxon identity with the children of Israel and with the journey of the Puritans and of the separatists into the New World as being the journey of the children of Israel through the wilderness into the new promised land. And this new promised land is going to be the place where basically all the prophecies about the eschaton come true, including, of course, obviously conversion of the Jews.
Yeah.
And it seems to me like there's something about this which definitely resulted in a peculiar quality to American religion, not just to the religions that are, you could say, like native to our soil, like Mormonism, as we've talked about, which very much has this, again, like you just extrapolate that a little further. It's not hard to see how the early Mormons thought of themselves as, we're the children of Israel, literally wandering through the desert, literally being persecuted, all these things, because we're going to establish a promised land in Missouri or Utah or wherever, right? All these different, things they had going on. So it's not hard to see how American religion, whenever American religion takes on an identity, at least American religion that comes from this layer, let's say, whenever it takes on this identity, it always has to kind of play out these different things. And you can obviously point to lots of parallel examples of where that's happening right now in American state. But I did want to sort of ask you, is there some truth to it in the sense that, is there some sense of this, America as kind of like the last place?
Yeah.
Right. When other religions come here, do they become more themselves, or do they lose themselves?
Yeah.
What do you think, Canadian Jonathan
Have I
Pageau?
ever talked about this publicly? Probably not. I mean, my insight is that it is true. And that, my brother Mathieu once had this great sense. He said, God loves irony, It's like, it doesn't matter what people's intentions are and what exactly they think they're doing. There are some things that are just happening. And even if people try to provoke them or whatever, and if there's something weirdly immoral about trying to provoke the eschaton, well, it doesn't matter. Like, some of the stuff is still kind of happening, right? And so I think that America is the place of the end. Yeah. And so in being the place of the end, it actually has these contradictions in them, which is that I sense that it is a lot of the images in the book of Revelation seem to be shining through America. It doesn't mean that it's the final form, that the world's going to end tomorrow.
Yeah.
Like, that's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that the image of the beast is clearest coming through the American lens. The image of the whore is like clearest coming through the American lens. And then the image of the heavenly Jerusalem as the gathering of all that is good together, and basically everything kind of offering up towards God is also happening in America. So if you think of, in Orthodoxy, think of the Ephraimite monasteries, like, that is something that is happening in America, where there's a man who seems to have been a holy man who founded all these monasteries that are thriving, that are alive, that are building, and it's like this wild thing. But there's also, basically most of the porn in the world comes from your country, right? Most of the horrible influences on culture have come from America, and sometimes they're being reflected in other cultures. Like, people complain about manga, for example, but it's like, dude, manga is like a dark reflection of something that came from America into Japan and then is being reflected back. The same with
something
Korea.
happened to Japan in like the middle of the last century. Did something happen? I don't know.
That would make them darkly nihilistic and want to. So I think that your insight is absolutely right, and I think that it is also related to America's relationship with Jews as well. That is, America has been a place where Jews were welcome and were thriving, and so all of the possibilities and contradictions and problems and opportunities that offers is clear in America. So that's how I see it. So I don't think that like America is the land of the eschaton. I think America is the land of the end. And so because of that, you have all of these images shining brighter, all the negative and positive aspects of the book of Revelation.
I think there definitely was, Martin Shaw was just down here for the Orthodox Arts Festival, which was really beautiful this year. But when I picked him up And, you've driven from the airport in Dallas. Like, it's kind of just a endless concrete hellscape.
It's just like it's like
and
the worst of American
yeah,
visual landscape
and
in Dallas.
Martin said something about it that was, shall we just say, not complimentary.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, no, you're just it's totally fair. But then later on, we were, of course, then like we get to the church, which is beautiful, incredibly beautiful church, and it's like, yeah, it's the weird thing is there's beautiful little gems like this tucked all over the metroplex, and then there's just like a lot of concrete, and it's just very, it's not consistent, it's just very,
Yeah.
but I've always kind of tied the suburban sprawl, and this is related to our video, or at least the series we've been on, in terms of the symbolism of America. I've always tied the urban sprawl, the suburban sprawl, to something that used to be called prairie madness. This idea is you'd be out on the prairie by yourself. Where I'm sitting right now was just all prairie, 100 years ago, and you'd be out on the prairie by yourself, and it's always the kind of the crazy people who want to go live out there anyway.
Yeah.
And like to even say I'm going to the New World, and then to
Yeah.
say now I'm going to Kentucky, and then to say, as Davy Crockett said, you may all go to hell, but I'm going to Texas. To like be the kind of person who's just like, I want to go out where there's no other people. Like that's a special kind of crazy to begin with. So it's important to remember that we are a country that was started exclusively by insane people.
But I want to say one last thing in relationship to this, because I want to be careful. I want to be careful that people don't think that what I'm saying is arbitrary. That is, when you imagine that there's a land that, at least from the point of view of the Europeans, is completely unknown or has been completely forgotten. And it's a huge land. It's the richest land. It's the one where everything is possible, where all the landscapes, all the different types of, it's like it basically condenses, if you take North America all together, it condenses the Arctic, to the deserts, to the luscious rainforest. Like, it has everything in it, right? And so when you leave where you are and you go somewhere else, there are two things that happen. One is the chaos of the new place, right? It's all the rejects that go out and then create all this kind of weird chaos. So a lot of the weird chaos that we're talking about. But then there's also people who leave for opportunity, and in leaving now want to create something that is more real than where they came from, because they need to, because they're far. And so they have to create a pure version of what they had, because of they need to do it in a deliberate way. And therefore they leave where they are, they go out, and then they make their church more that church than where it came from.
Yeah.
And so those two things are happening simultaneously. It's like, you imagine that it's almost like a new land, Christ is, all the seed is being poured there. All the wheat and the tares is growing more in this land because of that problem. And therefore you have this weird idea that America is both the land of the most conservative Christians and where porn is made, like those two extremes.
I think that is exactly the right place to end this video. And I'm sorry if you were hoping, folks, for like a detailed analysis of Kabbalah. You're never going to get that from me for a multitude of reasons. I'm not the right person to do that. But anyway, I hope this has been fun for everybody. It is a lot harder to talk about than some medieval stuff, in large part, I think, just because it's it starts to get a little close to home, and you have to be careful about how you talk about it, but also because I was telling Jonathan before the video started, I was like, just please let me do like Arthur again after this. I need a little medieval palate cleanser, get back to my home base where I feel comfy. But America is kind of a weird place in that you can both, go to the supermarket and also feel like you are more at home in Arthurian literature than you are in contemporary history and politics. So yeah, it's a weird place in that way. So yeah. So next time we'll be doing something else. But eventually we will get back and we'll start talking about other parts of American history. Actually, there's a lot of interesting stuff with the settling of Canada, which might be fun to talk about. There's a lot of non-controversial stuff with like the Spanish colonization efforts, which would also, Jonathan would love to talk to you guys about those things. So
I'll talk about anything, but thank you so much for putting all this effort into bringing us the the mythology of America to the forefront.
And you guys can stop sending me books now, seriously.
All right, everybody. We'll see you soon. Thanks a lot.